Hello, and welcome to Episode 2 of Faith-Unbound in Lycoming County, a podcast produced and presented by United Churches of Lycoming County. I'm your host, Lou Kolb. First, we'd like to thank you for the response to our first episode. We received several thoughtful and encouraging comments on Episode 1. We'll talk more about that toward the end of the program. But I'd like to get right to our special guest, Dr. J. Morris Smith, the Shepherd of the Streets in Williamsport. Now, there's good news and bad news about this interview. The good news is that Morris is a profound man who has given a great deal of thought to concerns like poverty and its causes, as well as what a proper Christian response to poverty should be. And he shares those thoughts with me in our conversation. The bad news is rather technical in nature. At this point, we are using a small but high-quality digital recorder with a built-in microphone to capture our on-location interviews. As you may have heard, it worked quite well when we spoke to Gwen Bernstein on Episode 1. This interview, however, was recorded in Morris's office, which is set up quite differently. The result is that both Morris and I sound somewhat off-mic. So you might want to turn up the volume a bit, or, even better, dig out your earbuds or headphones to listen. Each of these podcast productions is a great learning experience for me, and I'm confident that they will continue to improve as we move forward. And so, here is our conversation with the Shepherd of the Streets. Morris Smith, welcome to Faith-Unbound in Lycoming County. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
And I should say that we are recording this in Morris's office. We're at the Castellana Center at 320 Park Avenue, the office of Shepherd of the Streets. And we usually like to begin with finding out a little bit about our guest. And one does not have to speak to you for very long before discovering that you come from somewhere south of South Williamsport. So where'd you grow up?
I was born in Eagle Pass, Texas, which is right on the border. But I was raised in Uvalde, Texas, which is about 40 miles further inland. So I'm from Texas.
Have you spent most of your life below the Mason-Dixon line, or?
No, I'm sort of like Moses. That's the first 40 years down there, and then the next 40 years up here.
The old saying, faith is caught as well as taught. Did you come from a devout family?
Very.
Your interest in poverty is something that we'll be addressing further as the conversation goes on here. But what caught your attention about people who are poor? And when did that happen?
Well, it happened quite early in my ministry. I ministered in the Protestant side of things for 25 years. But early even in that, I had an experience where I was wasting some time while I was in a hospital as a visitor. And I went out it was an evening, very hot day, as Texas can be, in San Antonio. And I went out into the area surrounding, and it happened to be a very, very poor part of town. And as a result of that, I was walking down the streets, and I would hear babies crying in the open windows because it was so hot, and they were rolling around in their sweat, I'm sure, you know. It was just and people just didn't have what the rest of us had on a day like that. And I got to thinking about the poor, and got to thinking about being born in that situation. Most poverty that we deal with today is generational. You know, it's come down through the families. And so that got me started. But then I had lots of other experiences. And then at the end of that period of time, I had been to India. And you cannot see greater poverty than there. So
that explains something. I was going to ask you about a statement that I heard you make. I think at one of the United Church's annual assemblies. And as we record this, we're getting ready for the 2018 annual assembly, which will happen later this week. But you said something that startled me because it's not something that you hear much expressed by people these days. But you said, "It has always been a dream of mine to work with the poor."
Mm-hmm.
And so those experiences must have been the genesis of that dream.
Yes, and if you read the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Luke, you're going to see that was where Jesus would take the disciples in order to let them understand mercy and understand love and understand those kind of things. The field of the poor is the best classroom for anybody that wants to live the life of Christ.
Let's step back a second. The official title here, I guess, is Dr. J. Morris Smith.
Yes, it is.
What is the doctorate in?
Doctorate is in theology, but it's in clinical pastoral counseling.
And you do counseling here as part of your work with Shepherd of the Streets.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, a lot of clinical counseling, which means we help people to face whatever diseases they have, whatever issues they have physically and mentally and socially, because all of it works together. You know, we have to minister to the whole person. And Shepherd of the Streets does nothing but what is medically connected. So that just simply means that we have people that come in here that are very caught up in something that's just been told them by some doctor.
Mm.
And because they're here to get their medicine, or they're here to get help for some piece of medical equipment. And so after many years of pastoring and teaching, I finally get to do what my doctorate's in. You know?
Yeah. It's funny how life takes twists and turns like that.
Yeah.
How did you come to end up in Williamsport?
Well, like most people's lives, and even like the life of Moses. By the way, the reason I keep referring to Moses, I think it's interesting. Moses, as you know, was born on the Nile and was found by Pharaoh's daughter in a basket. And one time I asked my mother, where did I come from? Mm-hmm. I think that comes to every kid about about 5 or 6 or so. We're interested in where we came from.
Yeah.
She says, "Well, I'll tell you." She said, "Now, my mother was like this. You got to laugh about it." She said, "Well, I'll tell you." Says, "We went over to Mexico. We went over into Mexico. You know, we were living in Eagle Pass at the time we had you. And we went over into Mexico to get a clothes hamper. Now, clothes hampers over there in the marketplace are big baskets, big, beautiful baskets." And she said, when we got back over into the United States, she said, we opened it up and there you were. Because I had noticed that I'm the only dark one in my family. And by the way, Moses means dark and swarthy. So my dad's blonde, my brother's blonde, my sister's blonde. Now my mother isn't. My mother's like me, but I didn't notice that. So I too came out of a basket. If you believe her.
Well, and at the age of 5, I'm sure you did.
Yeah. And then, Moses had to take a trip. He had to go where he wasn't familiar. And so I came up here to the Northeast. And so at my 40th year, which is very interesting how that all works out, Mm-hmm. And Moses or Morris is actually Anglo-Saxon for Moses.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little about the shepherd of the street ministry. So you mentioned it was medical. So you don't feed people. You leave that to the food pantry, which is in the same building here as
That's
the
right.
shepherd. Who is your clientele?
My clientele is people who are either ignorant of what it is that's happening to them or what the doctor is talking about, and that's a big issue that we have here. And when I say ignorant, I'm using it in its proper sense. They just don't know what the guy's saying. And so health literacy is a big issue. So we get a lot of people who don't understand, what's going on with them. We get a lot of people who are in ill health, mainly because of poor nutrition as they grew up. We have an oral surgery grant, so we have lots of people who are losing their teeth at 20, 30 years old, sometimes because of drugs, but many times because they never had good dental hygiene as they grew up. Just things like that. And so it gives us the opportunity to deal with that. There's a proverb that says, "A cheerful heart does good like a medicine, but a wounded heart dries up the bones." And sometimes that's translated, "a wounded spirit dries up the bones." So that sort of thing is sort of our guide here. They come in with something ailing them, some physical issue, but then in dealing with it, we find where they have not had a very good raising and very good background, or they're wounded with lack of love, lack of care, lack of lots of things.
I think treating people with simple respect and dignity goes a long way too, and I'm sure you seek to do that here as well.
That's right.
There are a couple of places in Scripture I can think of where it says something to the effect that we will always have the poor.
Yeah, the poor you have with you
All the time. Jesus said that, and there's even something in the Old Testament where the law is being given to Moses, and it's how to treat the poor, and it says something similar there. I'd have to look up I'm not a very good chapter and verse guy. But is it possible, and a lot of people, I think, especially people who may be acting not necessarily for faith-based reasons, try to alleviate poverty completely. Is that possible?
No, because sin. There's social poverty and holy poverty, okay?
Yeah.
Social poverty is what most people mean when they say poverty.
Okay.
Holy poverty, as you know, was a big aspect of St. Francis' ministry. He lived in holy poverty because of the life that he was living in Christ. There was no need to supplement that with all the things of the world. Jesus dealt with that in many different ways as he went through. St. Francis picked up on that in his dealing with the poor, and his dealing with even Jesus. Jesus sent his disciples out in their final exam right before he was going to be taken from them. He sent them out without anything, without shoes, without an extra pair of shoes, without anything in their money belt, without all of that, to show them that when you live the life that he espouses, you're provided. So poverty that we talk about is poverty of education, poverty of health, poverty of, money, but more significant than money is just the poverty of the ability to gain it.
Would you say the gospel is the best representation of what should be a Christian response to poverty?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, because the one thing you have to do is ignore the fact of why this person is poor. And let me tell you that everyone is poor for a reason. Okay? People that come in here maybe dressed to the hilt. And I have some that do that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're asking me for a $3 copay. Now, they're poor, though they are putting on the front that they're not. See? But the poverty that they have is their ability to manage their life in such a way that they wouldn't have to come in here for a $3 copay. Poverty of choice. People don't know how to make choices because they've never learned how to make choices. And so much of our education now, our free education, I'm talking about public education, doesn't deal with those things anymore. Originally, public education, or schools out in the wild west, so to speak, used what they call a McGuffey reader.
Yes.
And it was a book of morality. It was a book of how to make a choice between what is just and what is just fair. See, and the thing is that the person who is buried in poverty looks at the world, looks on television, sees all that, and says, life isn't fair. Well, that's never going to be fair. God isn't fair. If God was fair, I'd be 6 feet too. All right? I'm a Texan. I'm supposed to be 6 feet too. But God is just. And what we fail to do is see the difference between something fair and something just. So we're dealing here with justice. Okay? I think the popular word for that is social justice. But I'd rather call it Christian justice, the justice of God. When we look at fairness and in the eyes of the world, we try to make everything equal. That's why,
yes,
people want to rob from the rich and give to the poor. Rob the Robin Hood complex. That's not going to create a better situation, because the poor don't know how to deal with all of that. I feel very sorry for the people that win the lottery. A person that's lived on $35,000, $40,000 a year, all of a sudden wins $200,000. They don't know how to deal with that.
It's funny because you rarely hear of somebody who does win and ends up better off for it.
That's right. That's right. And especially the family. The family. In other words, being able to be fair with the family when you win a large amount of money. No, you have to work on justice. What is just? What is right? See? And then we get to segue into that a lot of times in dealing with people, because they don't see that their contracting cancer, for instance, is fair. No, it's fair as far as fairness goes, because they're a human being. Okay, and but as far as it may not be just, and then you get it talking about, why are you a victim of whatever it is? Why are you a victim? Then we get into the area of justice. Okay, and so people then are brought from being angry and put out about whatever has happened to them to a standpoint of looking at life in terms of righteousness, in terms of why do I have a sclerotic liver? Because from the age of 12, I've drank like a like a sailor,
yeah,
as we say. It's that kind of thing. Here's a person that's got lung cancer. How long have you been smoking? Since I was about 13. Okay, he's got to see that's not a matter of fairness. That's a matter of justice. And so that's how Jesus deals with it, and that's how God has dealt with all of us. You know, Jesus says a lot of things in that regard. And that's the important thing, is to get them to quit looking at life like, well, where's mine? You know, and look at life with the idea of, this is where I've done wrong and got off the path. And yeah, when you do something that's not true, then the reaction of untruth is going to happen.
I want to get back to something you mentioned a couple of minutes ago. People are poor for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So if one wants to work with the poor, check your judgments at the door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which seems to be...
We're all poor in some sense.
Something that people have trouble doing these days.
Yeah. We're all poor in some sense.
Yeah.
And we're all poor in the eyes of God. For sure.
How can those who are listening to this help this ministry if they choose to?
Well, it's an interesting ministry because they need to understand that what we provide as far as any material provision to deal with whatever they have, like medicine, the payment for a medicine. I don't do medicine, of course, but I help them get it.
Mm-hmm.
What we provide in the way of gasoline so they can get to Geisinger. What we provide in the sense of bus pass so they can get to their drug counseling appointments. This kind of thing. That they're not what we need in terms of them being here. What we need is the money for that. See, our biggest problem is we always are running out of funds because medicine has gone up sky high, though I'm glad to hear that everybody wants to work on that now to get drugs down where they ought to be.
Yeah.
And everything is so expensive these days. You know, gasoline is higher than it's ever been in my lifetime. So we just need, we need the money because we live in a capitalistic society. You know, we don't live back in the days when we could barter, but we live in a capitalistic society which takes money to get from here to there.
Well, Morris Smith, Shepherd of the Street, thank you for your time, and God bless you and your work.
Thank you.
Dr. J. Morris Smith, Shepherd of the Streets for United Churches of Lycoming County. I hope you notice that behind the soft-spoken demeanor is a profound and humble gentleman who does his best to serve God by serving his fellow man in a godly way. Maybe we'll continue that conversation on a future podcast. I have many other questions I'd love to ask Morris, and we thank him for his time and making himself available to us. Now, we'd like to thank those of you who sent us your comments on Episode 1 of Faith-Unbound in Lycoming County. That was our conversation, of course, with Gwen Bernstein, Executive Director of UCLC. All the comments were encouraging and thoughtful, and the critiques, of which there were several, and well-deserved, I might add, were delivered in a constructive and civil manner. That is quite refreshing, these polarized times, and so we thank you for that as well. If you have any other comments on either Episode 1 or on Episode 2 of Faith Unbound, send them to my email address, loukolb@gmail.com. That's LOUKOLB, loukolb@gmail.com. If you liked what you heard on Faith Unbound, please tell your friends about our podcast. They can find it on YouTube, youtube.com. That's where we're posting it for now. We do have bigger plans for the future, and we'd really like to make it available on the smart speakers, the Google Home, the Amazon Echo, devices like that, which a lot of people have, and which would make it very easy to access the podcast. For now, though, they're on YouTube, and best to search for United Churches of Lycoming County. Hopefully you'll be able to just go on there and search for Faith-Unbound in Lycoming County, but I'm not sure that we put the episode 1 up there with the proper title, so we'll have to fix that. In the meantime, if you search for United Churches of Lycoming County, you should see our podcasts among the results. I do these programs as time permits, so I really can't say when episode 3 will be ready. But Gwen is a terrific disseminator of information, so if she has your email address, you'll find out about it as soon as it's published. And you can always learn more about United Churches of Lycoming County and its ministries by visiting our website. The address is www.uclc.org. Again, that's www.uclc.org. I'm Lou Kolb. See you next time on Faith Unbound in Lycoming County.